Margaret Kelleher is the Genetic Operations Manager at ICBF. She's very well known for developing the Cow's Own Worth Index. It's a really, really good tool. Margaret has 10 years experience working at the cutting edge of genetics in Ireland. We're delighted to have her here today to talk to us. And Margaret and her husband also last year have taken on a leased dairy farm as well, because I'll talk about leased farms as well, but it is very much a family farm. And that's something that's very, very important. So she farms there with her husband Brendan and her son Sean, who's 3, but also Dara, who's only 7 weeks old. So we just want to congratulate all the family on the birth of their child, and we're going to Margaret now, so we said John step down, and we think of any questions for John as well, or Margaret. So thanks, Margaret. Take it away.
Thanks very much, and thanks to Jay for asking me to speak here today. Nothing like getting out and about after 7 weeks. I'm going to focus on the better cows aspect of this session, because John's really covered the more grass aspect very, very well. So look, for years we've all been chasing and breeding for better cows. Now our definition of what the better cow is has changed over time. So pre-EBI it was all about more milk, but as efficiency became more important and more data came along as well, and the establishment of the database, we were able to evolve our breeding and look at things like fertility for efficiency traits, and the EBI has progressed over time to include these into the EBI, and I suppose most recently we see even the kind of environmental factors being to focus on the policy changes that are being enforced on us as well. So this has changed over time. So has it worked? And I'm sure most of you have seen this graph over several years, but I just think it's a really good graph in terms of showing us the genetic trend. And for this group of cows here, it's the national herd, it's the cows on farms on the 1st of July. How has it performed in the last 25 years? And you can see the blue line there going steadily up, so a genetic gain there of around 11 euros per year. So that's excellent, because on the ground that means 20 euros more profit for making the right breeding decisions. So if we want these better cows, a simple, cost-effective way to do that is making those right breeding decisions. We see most of that increase has come from the milk and fertility sub-index, which again makes sense. It makes up over 2/3 of the breeding policy, and that works for us in terms of getting that extra 2 euros profit into your pockets. So, that's the genetic gain, and I'm conscious that I'm talking to a maybe real grass-focused audience, and here I am talking about breeding, but there's breeding in grass, but there's, we're focusing on the cows here. On the ground, trying to show you again where this translates, having that better breeding decision, plus all the things that John mentioned there in terms of better management, in terms of your grass. What does it translate to? So John showed us the top 10% and the bottom 10%. I'm showing you from the national database, the bottom 20% against the top 20%. But because the focus of this session is about better cows, I think it's even more interesting to maybe just let's look at the average versus the top 20%, right? So we're just going to assume no one in this audience is in the bottom 20%, right? So in terms of EBI, you can see there's a 53 euros difference there in their EBI. Yes, you can see that the litres produced, the solids produced, massive differences there. So the top 20% are producing 53 more milk solids per year. Again, a lot of that could be down to, again, picking the right milk and fertility traits in the bulls that they're picking in their breeding decisions. You can see there's 16 days less of a calving interval, 12% more calving in a 6-week period. And through that efficiency, that's where we're actually gaining in carbon emissions as well. So it's hand in hand going. The more efficient you are, the more environmentally friendly you are, and again, that leads maybe tying into what Anya's talking about in policy, and in terms of how we sell our products worldwide. That is, a really important thing that we need to start focusing on as well. So that's equivalent, having those metrics there, the top 20% versus the average, that's equivalent to 345 euros more profit per cow. So again, for an average herd, that's 34,000. So massive savings there. There's your better cows. So what if we could bring, as an industry, bring the bottom 40% of genetics out there up into the top 20%? So if we were to look at the national databases showing us that the people that are in the bottom 40% genetics, their average cow numbers is 81 versus the top 20% of 149, that's not important. I'm only focusing on the genetic aspect here. So looking at that EBI of 139 versus 231, the kilos of milk solids per cow difference there is €69, or 69 kilos, sorry. So again, that has a massive impact on farm profitability, obviously. Milk solids is very heritable. So it's 35% heritable. So if we assume of that 69 milk solid difference, that picking the right genetics will account for 24 kilos of that. So just making one breeding decision. So it doesn't cost anything apart from your time. So just focusing on those bottom 40%, what would that mean for them? So in terms of improved milk solids, that would bring them up to 412. In terms of extrapolating that out into the number of cows they have, and then looking at the solids difference from where they are now at the bottom 40% of genetics up to the top 20%, that's over €12,000 there in profit just by bringing their genetics up, nothing else. Let their management be the same. At a national level, that would mean 57 million. So it's absolutely, there's massive potential there by making those right breeding decisions. So the focus of my talk, in terms of getting these better cows, I've broken it into 3 sections. There's direct selection, which you're already doing, and I'll touch on that. I think the breeding strategies that I want to speak about is where all the new stuff is coming in, so bear with me with that. That's where the most interesting aspects of this talk are. And then a very quick note on culling decisions. So on the direct selection, there's 3 aspects. One, you need to know your herd, and most of you do. Can you comfortably sit, without looking into your phones, know where your strengths and weaknesses of your herd are at? So you can use your herd EBI scorecard to get a high level of your indexes, but other people drill in more. They know they need more protein, or they know they need to improve more in their fertility, or they might have a TB issue in their locality, and do they need to focus more on lower TB bulls in their breeding decisions? And again, if someone says to you, I have the same EBI as you, you don't have the same herd. You shouldn't really have the same team of bulls when you're picking out your bulls. If you look at this herd A and herd B, well, they have the exact same EBI. You can see a completely different makeup of their EBI. So their breeding decisions are going to be very, very different to each other when the overall EBI is exactly the same. So that's number 1, is your herd. Number 2, I'm going to state the obvious, you should be picking your highest EBI breeding females to be the dams of your next replacement heifers. So a national guideline, the average EBI last year for cows was around €170, so the guideline was you should select all your breeding females are above this 170. But you use an individual sitting there, maybe that's a way too low of a benchmark, maybe it's too high. If it's too high, would you consider buying? Would you consider buying in your genetics? And the focus I'm going to talk about in the breeding strategies section of this talk is to genotype your females. So I'll wait for that aspect. So again, if you're imagining this was your herd, on the very top right there are your high EBI cows down to your very low EBI cows. We're obviously going to pick the high EBI cows to be your future, the dams of the future replacement. And the third section of direct selection then is obviously your team of bulls. And I do think as an industry people are really taking that message on board, that they are picking their team of bulls, but where we're falling down is on, are you using them equally across your herd? So the guideline is that we should only be using max 15% matings of one bull across your herd. Nationally, when we look at the database, it's telling us there's 27% of the calves coming from one bull. And that is a serious issue. If that bull goes down with genetic proofs, for whatever reason, you have now a crop of daughters that are not going to be the better cows for you. So, based on farmer feedback, actually, what was happening was that there was discussion groups, and over the last few years, and when this was highlighted to the individual farmer, that look, yeah, you used the right number of bulls across your herd, but actually, 27% of the top bull there was used on your cows. They didn't actually realise that because they were making the right decisions when they were buying the straws from the eye company. But you all know yourselves, during the busy breeding period, things happen. The bull isn't available, or for whatever reason, there was more usage of a particular bull, and farmers weren't that aware that they were actually overusing certain bulls. So there is the weekly fertility reports on the Herd Plus, and that was actually built into it. So this is just a snapshot of it. It shows you what your previous bull team selection was. So for this herd, they used 15 bulls, and it shows there what was the top bull most used, and they used 19%, so they overused. But then now they can make better breeding decisions. And I know you're all getting geared up for calving, but you need to be thinking about your breeding now as well. So the next section here is spelling it out for you how many bulls you need to be using as a bare minimum. So for this herd, they have 104 heifers and cows all together, so they're the breeding crop. They need to use a minimum number of 8 bulls for them and a maximum bull use of 15%. And you can see that they performed much, much better in the 2024 breeding season there, where the max usage of the top bulls there was 14%. So they didn't exceed, and they actually used 10 bulls instead of 8 bulls. So they're really, reducing their risk of any issues in terms of a proof going down for any reason, and maximising the genetic potential of their herd going forward. So I do think that is a take-home message for people here today. It's just to really, focusing on that you really are using bulls equally across the cows. So that's direct selection. So you use your EBI and focus on those 3 aspects: the herd, females, and your bulls. But the breeding strategies, this is where we're seeing some new emerging trends. So I'm going to start with the genomics. So genomics isn't new. It came in 2009. We were the second country in the world to adopt it. This graph I showed you at the very start, but I just drew the line in here to show you that 2009 and what genomics did for genetic gain in this country. So prior to genomics, the rate of genetic gain was around €5 genetic gain per year, and it accelerated to over €11 per year afterwards. And that's simply because when you get the DNA of the animal, we have more information on those animals. So the AI companies can pick their bulls more accurately, the generation interval, so the parents of the next crop of heifers are younger. So, if we're always making gains in genetics, if you're picking younger parents, they will be more genetically advanced than their previous parents. So that's where a lot of the gains are coming from. And, it just really accelerated how the genetic gain prospered in this country. So that's the rate of genetic gain has doubled. And just, again, it might be an obvious one, but again, in terms of usage of different bulls, there is about a €70 difference in profitability in EBI between a genomic AI bull and a stock bull. And again, if we look at the national database, 30% of the heifers out there in this country are actually started by a stock bull. So they're leaving behind €70 profit on the ground. So that's 6 or 7 years of genetic gain just lost. On average. I'm sure there are some stock bulls out there that probably should have been picked up by an AI company and absolutely stellar, but on average, that's what we're seeing from the database. So what has happened in the last year is the National Genotyping Programme, and again, there might be a good few people in the crowd that are involved in this, but this is where I see maybe the potential for a change in how the rate of genetic gain will go forward, because now we used to have only about 6% of herds out there genotyping all their cows. Now that's risen to 35%. So 35% of dairy herds out there are genotyping all their cows. That means they can make better breeding decisions. That means that they know exactly who their parents are in terms of the DNA is telling them. It's giving better predictions of their proofs. So if we look at our cows there on the right, after genotyping them, you might find that the best cows that were ranked initially might actually turn into the wrong, there might be lower EBI than what you initially thought. So that might just happen for the way that naturally the DNA is inherited by those animals from their father and their mother. It's by chance. On average, they should be the same, but at times we do have outliers that will go up and go down. We always hear about the ones that go down, we never hear about the ones that go up, but it definitely does happen. So there's other reasons why your cows might re-rank based on after you genotype these animals. And you can see from the National Genotyping Programme, really if you were to think yourself, there was 17% of parentage errors from the National Genotyping Programme. And there was people there that would promise you there's no way I have any parentage errors, I do it by the book, I have everything perfect. But there's so many things that can happen. The wrong straw inserted, the wrong recording, a calf going to a gate, going to the wrong dam. Mix-ups do happen, and I think that is quite a staggering statistic to see that 17% of animals that went through the National Genotyping Programme had that much parentage error. So by correcting those errors, you then have better cows because you have the right, parentage in front of you. There was even things like the breed. So for example, if you look at the 3% there of correction of breed errors, there's plenty of Anguses out there that are actually milked and people didn't realise it. They thought they were crossbred, so that's a reality. So you can see there just under 4,000 registered as Angus but weren't Angus, and a similar number that were registered Angus but were actually a completely different breed. So again, look, it's just an interesting statistic. DNA can't lie. And you know, there was research done by Chagas and Abacus Bio on the economic front of this that suggests that there is actually a 4:1 return on your investment when you genotype. So moving from genomics, and I'm going to get on to sex semen here now, and I really see this as having a big effect in terms of what are the cows of the future going to look like. Excuse me. So you can see here the last couple of years, the orange line there is the dairy reserves. So that was inclining as the national herd was kind of increasing. You can see the national herd has actually stabilised in the last number of years, but there was a massive reduction there from 2021, and that was taken up then by displacing dairy males. There was dairy beef was being introduced, so not introduced, but increasing at the same rate as the decline. But all of this was down to the fact that sex semen became more available here in this country after 2020. So in 2021, we had the Moore Park lab established, and what followed suit then was NCBC created their lab, and then we also had Dovea and Eurogene following suit as well. So the capacity, the choice in bulls has been much richer in the last few years. So that is why we're seeing people adopting sex semen, but of course it's not without its faults as well. It is a more fragile product, and there has been cases where it really hasn't worked that well in some herds. But again, looking from the national database, what are the calf crop trends now because of what we're seeing from sex semen? So just have a pie chart here of 2020, just before we really took off with sex semen. So there was around a 50-50 breakdown of obviously the dairy males, dairy females, and 43% were dairy beef. However, now in 2024, for the first time ever, we have more dairy beef coming out of our dairy herd than we do dairy calves. So if everyone was to adopt sex semen, if we do another what-if scenario here, if everyone was to adopt sex semen, what would the crop of calves look like? Well, this is potentially it. You could potentially have only 3% dairy males. So that produces a bit of a challenge there. Are we going to have an issue with our genetic gain because we don't have bulls to select? How do we address that? There's plenty of people looking at that. More reproductive physiologists more than anything in terms of are there ways to do that? There are, and will they be adopted? I don't know. But because now you have sex semen, you don't need this excess in dairy heifer replacement, so you can see that the reduction there in dairy heifers potentially being around 22%, and 3/4 of the calf crop then being dairy beef calves. So I am going to bring that up again because we really need to focus on that as well in terms of the quality of these calves. But just before I do, I just wanted to touch on the efficacy of the sex semen based on the national herd. So what I have here is the ratio of what animals got pregnant to their first service from the 2023 breeding season, and all this data was backed up then and verified by the 2024 calving season. So with heifers and cows here, you can see obviously the conception rates there for the conventional semen is as expected in terms of it's higher than the sexed. Yet, what I think is quite good to see is that the sex semen isn't all that far behind. When you think about the fact that you're getting a resulting heifer calf, you don't have the male calves. Yes, you're losing a small bit of your conception rate, but for the heifers, it's at a 93% relative conception rate to the conventional. So there is, there's probably a bit of debate about should I be using sex on heifers. Maybe people can't, for management reasons. It's just easier to leave off a few stock bulls. But definitely, the advice from a total genetic perspective would be they are your best genetics because they're the youngest, and you should be using sex semen on those anyway, and try to give them that opportunity. And for the cows, they're not all that far behind either. Their relative pregnancy rate sex to conventional was 87%. So it has improved over the last few years since 2018 when it was first introduced. So We focus a lot there on the better cows, but you can't just ignore all your other cows. You still have to breed the low EBI ones too. And we're not without the big headlines that we see constantly about fear of what will happen or calf crops, and is there going to be further restrictions. So we need to make better breeding decisions for these cows. So I'm going to just very briefly touch on the dairy beef index. That is the index you should be using to pick your beef bulls for your dairy cows. I think most of you would be very comfortable telling me what calving difficulty you would be comfortable with, but would you really know your beef traits? So, again, it's a 3 sub-index index. It's, if you break it down like that, it is quite a simple index compared to your EBI, has 8 sub-indexes. I really think the message here is we should be focusing a small bit more on beef without compromising your calving difficulty or gestation. So again, quick message here, just because you might be picking the top DBI bull doesn't mean they are the same. I have 2 bulls here, just for an example, where one is an easy calver and one is more on the beef side. While they have the exact same DBI, I'm just focusing here on the calving traits. Do you really need a really low heifer risk DBI bull if you're breeding all your heifers to sex semen anyway, so that you're not worried about them? What about your mature cows? Could you give them a small bit more? So that second bull there is a 3% calving difficulty all that bad? It's really not. Yet he is a bull that's going to give you 10 kilos more carcass weight. You might not have him, but the next person might, needs that 10 kilos more carcass weight out there. And as an industry, if we want people to be rearing these calves, we really do need to incentivise it by breeding better quality without compromising on what we need in terms of calving difficulty and gestation. In terms of what's actually out there from the active bull list, and if we categorised the bulls that are out there by their calving difficulty, so you can see there the first column there, 1% down to 8%. The number of bulls there, if we were to look at 2% calving difficulty, there's 46 sires, 3% calving difficulty, there's 123 bulls out there, and you can see their DBIs listed there. But in terms of their beef sub-index, there's massive range. So if I was just to focus here on the 3% calving difficulty bulls, you have 123 to pick from. Their average DBI is 143, but you could be picking a bull there with only 39 euros beef sub-index. Just don't do it. When there's bulls out there between 106 and 175 and they still are both 3% calving difficulty, that is the key message there. We just have a quick look. It's only one breeding decision. It'll only cost you your time, and pick those bulls to have better quality calves on the ground. So that the calves that you do get on the ground, they get a commercial beef value. Commercial beef value is for any animal that is destined for beef. So it's not just for the calves. If you have yearlings or if anyone's out there looking at older stock, they will also have their CBVs. And it essentially is the DBI without the calving, because it's not a breeding index. CBV is just about the beef traits that are in that animal for the finisher that's going to finish them. So does it work? There's been numerous studies in Chagas on this as well, and look, this is just from the ICBF database, looking at 62,000 Angus cross steers that were finished in 2024, but their CBVs were generated before all that data came in on them, so it was the predicting their performance in December 2023. And if you break them down into the 1-star and the 5-star that they are, you can see that their CBV difference was €83, but the age of finish, you can see the metrics there are 2.3 earlier days of finish for the 5-star and more carcass weight in terms of genetic prediction. And what actually happened on the ground, you can see that it was 26 days earlier finish, 12 kilos more carcass and more conformation, resulting in a better factory price of €82. If you put a Chagas cost there of the 26 days reduced age of finish of €1.66, that's a €43. So each person that had one of these 5-star calves was getting an extra €125 per animal. So look, again, for finishers, if we really want them to be there in the future, we need to be giving them that incentive. Where can you get the CBV? It's online. It's their CBV profile for all the herds. So you as a dairy farmer have a CBV for all your animals if your SAR is recorded. On our ICBF Herd Plus app, it's also free and available on that. And if anyone's at the market and they're selling their calves, it should be on the mark boards if the animal has been genotyped. I also just want to note that there is a new mark tracker app as well. So for anyone that wants to go purchasing animals on a given day, you can actually see what's actually been, what's in each mart at any time, any day, what's for sale. So when the animal is brought to the mart, their blue card is scanned, it comes to the database, and you can track. So anyone that's actually buying calves can actually see, is there any suitable calves there? So if they see a load of 5-star CBV calves, they might turn up that day and buy the calves. So there was a lot going on there in the breeding strategies. So in terms of like our EBI and genetic gain at the moment is around €11. That could actually accelerate or it actually might decline based on what we've just spoken about. That's sex semen, you know, huge opportunity there within your own herds to make the better breeding decisions with your females. But you know, as an industry, there's work behind the scenes in terms of what are we doing about this 3% potentially of dairy males that we might have going forward if everyone was to adopt sex semen. And then again, the key message there, when you're picking your bulls for the beef, please do focus on that beef merit. You know, that extra kilos of carcass and the shorter age of finish really does make all the difference for those people rearing those animals going forward. And lastly then, the culling decisions, and this is only a one slider, but obviously when you're making culling decisions, we're not going to cull cows just under EBI, we're going to cull cows if they're not a calf, if they have high cell count, or you know, they have other issues. So you know, you will see things like this happening where we have our cows ranked from high EBI down to low EBI, you could see some of your really high EBI cows going. This is all done for you in the cow index, the COW. This is available for spring calving herds that are milk reporting. It looks at the current profit that the cow can give you in her lactation right now. It also weighs up the cost to replace her. So if she's a first lactation cow and you're replacing her, that's a big cost, but it might have to happen if she's, you know, there's some serious issues with her. But I think the real strength of the cow index is its ability to give you future performance predictions. So can you tell me that the cow in front of you today is going to be around in 2, 3, 4 years' time? It's very hard to measure, but with the cow index, it takes into account her past performance, her genetic merit, and her likely future performance. So it really ranks cows very well. So it ranks the cows best to worst. So the cows at the end of the cow index, they're your passenger cows that you definitely do not need around. And definitely with tightening stocking rates and policy changes coming forward, I really would recommend people to be using the cow index just to really, you know, it'd be very quick for you to pick out, you know, the obvious cows, but those passenger cows, this tool is quite useful for you. So before I go, I just want to let everyone know in terms of EBI, there are some proposed updates to the EBI in the latter half of this year. We're looking at the economic value changes there with launch to Moore Park. It's just to reflect the cost of production, make it more in line with what is there today. If that goes ahead, we bring in a base population change. So I'm not sure if some of you remember there back in 2017-18, we did a base population change. So at the moment, when we have an EBI of 0, that's based on a group of cows that were born in 2005 and were milk recorded in 2007, and a base population change would just be bringing that up a bit forward, a bit to a more recent group of animals to perhaps make it look more reflective. So that's just something that potentially might come in. The linear evaluations, they're just getting a model update as well, so we're working with the IHFA on that. And then I just want to highlight as well the health and management traits that we have. We're just doing a model upgrade on that, but I would really recommend again people to record their data. We only get around 10 to 14% of the health and management data coming into the database. There's loads of different tools out there. One of these will be the new ICBF Herd Plus app. It was created initially for just the NGP herds, but now it has recording facilities in it as well, so it is quite a neat little app. So if you have any health data, it has all the recording elements in terms of fertility and sires and all that, so you can record in that. So to conclude, my messages to everyone here is to keep doing what you're doing. The EBI is working, but just to retweet, please use a diverse team of bulls, but use them evenly. In terms of genotyping, the technology is there. There is a good return on investment on that one, and it just gives you more precision in your breeding decisions. Sex semen has the ability to really give us a lot of opportunity, maybe a few challenges, so that's something to maybe keep a focus on in the next couple of years. And definitely when you're picking your bulls there, or your beef bulls, to focus on that beef merit and try out the cow index if you haven't before, just to see can you find those pasture cows. Thank you.